Hello, I'm your host, Brandy for the podcast Nurturing a Child's Consciousness. This is a podcast about relationship, consciousness, and well-being, especially as those realities live in children and the adults who care for them. This is a space to explore wholeness. Each episode invites us to look at how we know our world and how children know theirs. What becomes possible when relationship, rather than performance, becomes the foundation? If you're a parent, an educator, a caregiver, or simply someone who can feel that life holds more than just managing and getting through the day, you're in the right place. Hi, everyone. Welcome in. In today's podcast, we pause to answer questions from listeners about the previous 5 podcast episodes. Thank you to everyone who wrote in with your questions. To start us off, here's our first question. If self-observation is a natural capacity, how can we bring it forth in children using natural learning relationships?
Thank you, and thank you to the person who sent in the email. We certainly appreciate that. So every child is capable, has the capacity for self-observation and self-reflection within their developmental field of knowing. So we have to engage them according to their capacity, both for self-observation and within that developmental field. There's different communication opportunities in different fields of knowing, because you can't bring forth self-observation if you aren't communicating with the child's capability. The inquiry or the connection or the conversation and the communication has to be relational to the developmental capabilities of the child. Also, one of the great things to bring forth self-observation in children is if the parents themselves or the elders or the teachers are engaging in self-observation. And we can bring this forward in our everyday conversations, as in, oh, I just saw this in myself, or when we practice ourselves, we bring forth our own self-observation capacities. And at the same time, we make it an everyday conversation among all of us within the family or within the classroom. And in this way, the child has, oh, I have this capacity too, just like learning language or any other natural capacity.
I wanted to add, Bob, that I loved that you brought in that the adult or parent or guardian or teacher needs to model self-observation, because children learn a lot by observing what their elders do. But also, I think it's important to help children notice rather than explain what's happening inside their bodies. Like, my tummy feels tight. And really, our job is to stay curious rather than correct. Oh, here's what you can do so your tummy doesn't feel tight. And that kind of kills the mood. You want to say, give children an opportunity to feel supported in their emotional literacy or their body literacy, in anything that they self-observe in their bodies or their emotions or their thoughts or anything like that. Saying something like, I wanted to hit my friend or my playmate because I was angry, is self-observation as long as they don't act on it. But not being judgmental or trying to fix whatever it is the child is self-observing is going to go a long way to supporting them to feel confident in doing this.
Josette, I think you bring up a great point of when you talk about the tummy being tight. I was thinking, oh, the self-observation is normally happening at a time where there's been a conflict or something has gone wrong. But you're reminding me that it's not just happening when a child needs to self-observe because they did in fact hit the other child or do something as an adult we perceive as wrong. But that self-observation is happening all the time, or that opportunity is there in whatever emotions they're experiencing. And it's up to us as the adult to see that opportunity to help them self-reflect in whatever's going on. Just the other day, Max just sat on the couch and he sighed and he said, today's been a good day. And an opening, what does that mean? What made it so good? It's a beautiful opening into that self-observation.
Yeah, we're just modeling self-awareness, staying curious. helping them notice their experience. And a lot of times we do that by just providing the developmental nourishments. I know we'll talk about that in a minute, but we're just supporting reflection at whatever age they're at and whatever capacities they have without trying to change anything.
I think a couple of examples will help. And the ones both of you just brought up are great. I think people don't understand, though, how to do self-observation in relationship. And this is really, really important because we know that the children are organizing around the organizing principle of trust. It's if we're doing it and it's around a dinner table, for example, and there's what happened in my relationships today? What did I see about myself when the three of us were trying to get this podcast going and we couldn't make the technology work? We were laughing so hard we almost fell off our chairs. What happened inside of me? Who was I in that moment? And bringing that to the dinner table so that other people could offer their self-observations in their relationship moments, and they could even ask me about mine. Those are the kinds of just everyday experiences that allow us to normalize this capacity, because unfortunately in our culture, it's not normalized.
So we've talked about self-observation, and you mentioned the word organizing principle, Bob. And that goes right into a question that we got from another listener around what is an organizing principle? And how does an organizing principle relate to a field of knowing? What's the dynamic there? Why fields of knowing and not stages? So there's 3 questions there.
Well, I'll start with describing a field of knowing. Most developmentalists use the word stage as a stage of development, which often implies a kind of linear direction forward or a ladder where one is going up, and a hierarchy of a gradual sequence in which people are expected to move from one level to another level. But we use the term field of knowing because it emphasizes a lived experience rather than a ranking. And a field of knowing is not simply a step on a ladder or a staircase, or it's not even a hierarchy. It's just a valid way of knowing the world that emerges during a particular developmental period and continues to remain available throughout life. There are particulars to a field of knowing. For example, the language that we might use in each field of knowing would be different because of the way the child organizes their space and time. An organizing principle is basically a central way that a person makes sense of themselves, others, and the world at a particular period of development. And it's the underlying pattern that organizes perception, meaning-making, behavior, relationships, and learning. So rather than focusing on what someone knows, an organizing principle describes how they know, and it shapes what they pay attention to and what feels important and how they interpret experience. I'll give a brief example. A 1-year-old repeatedly might drop a spoon from a high chair, and from an adult perspective, it could look like a game. From a child's perspective, they're exploring. They're exploring what happens. If I drop this, if I let go of this and it falls down, they're exploring relationship. They're exploring predictability of the world through direct experience. Their knowing is organized through sensory exploration, not abstract concepts like gravity or more sophisticated ideas. But the organizing principle is just a pattern that shapes how we make meaning. And the field of knowing is the developmental world created by that pattern.
The other part of the organizing principle that we have to keep in mind is that it's always organizing towards well-being, that there is an innate movement to develop my sense of rightful place, my abilities to know how to trust myself and others, in the early teen years, how to self-govern, and of course, the profound understanding of interconnectedness between 18 and 23 or so. By always moving towards well-being, this is in line with the understanding that in life and the life energy wants to succeed, wants to enjoy a healthy and meaningful life. And so that even if a child, for instance, I'll give an example of a young man. This is in a community which we lived in a while ago. I think I may have said this before because it's an excellent example, but the community had agreed to give up TV. And the young man, 10 years old, and he saw his neighbor watching TV and he brought it to his mother. And his mother said, "Oh, we can't talk about that because he's older and it'll be embarrassed and all that sort of thing." The young man found himself betrayed. And betrayal is a very difficult emotion to participate in and to process. And so consequently, there were other behaviors that he brought forward, anger, sibling issues, anger towards his parents, etc. And that looks like, oh, he's acting out. And that would be not okay. Don't talk to your parents that way. Treat your sister better. All these other things. But that kid is saying, I need trust. That's what I need. I need trust, and it's not here. And at 10 years old, he doesn't have any other tools at this point but to bring that forward. And natural learning relationships will even track that rather deeply and further into deeper interpersonal confusions that happen in the child's life for which he's more and more repeatedly blamed. And in this respect, trust in himself, trust in the world has been truncated and it's wounded, it's not gone. There's no organizing principle that's gone, as Josette just said earlier. It's throughout life, these fields of knowing. But how will it unfold now? And do we need to make reparations? I mean, what's really going on here? So the understanding of behavior should be seen through the eyes of the field of knowing and the organizing principle. And they'll make a lot more sense to everyone and allow us to reorganize towards trust rather than punishing or making the child feel other for their way of trying to bring us back into the trusting relationship.
I think it's important to say also that children make sense out of their world differently as they grow. Hence, the term field of knowing will change as to what children perceive in an event, what meaning they might place on an experience, how they understand themselves, how they understand others. Children, believe it or not, we all organize our memories in different ways at different ages. So as children decide what matters, the memory of an event will change as well. And we create narratives out of our experiences depending on how we're perceiving that experience. So different ages of development will actually perceive the same experience entirely differently.
So, we have another question from the listeners. What exactly is a developmental nourishment in natural learning relationships? What does that mean?
The easiest way to understand a developmental nourishment is to understand what we need for our physical bodies. Just like we all need protein and certain vitamins and a good balanced diet to have a healthy physical body, so we need certain psycho-emotional nourishments in order to have a successful psychology, a successful way of living, a sense of well-being, and create meaning within our developmental field of knowing. So there's 1,000 ways to create protein. And any diet in any culture has to go ahead and provide that. Likewise, the developmental nourishment is a constellation of opportunities in which we create a diet for that particular child in that particular moment, in that culture, within their developmental field. of knowing. So we have to know our children and we have to participate. I'm saying this at some length because NLR, natural learning relationships, is not a theory. It's an epistemology. And because it's an epistemology, it's a way of knowing that we have to participate in order for it to come alive. So when we talk about developmental nourishments, we'd rather talk about protein and leave it to the individual family or culture or whomever to provide that nourishment in ways appropriate to that child in his or her or their world.
So in that respect, you're saying it's very relational. And I think that's important to point out that developmental nourishments are not rewards, they're not techniques, they're not interventions, they're experiences that meet fundamental developmental needs. And they help organize the nervous system, support meaning making, and allow developmental capacities to emerge naturally. And I thought I'd give a few examples. An infant primarily needs loving touch, safety, a sense of security, and a rich sensory environment to explore sensorially. Whereas a school-age child, although they need those things, primarily are expanding out into needing more trustworthy relationships, because what's organizing at that developmental field of knowing is the organization of trust, how to trust ourselves, how to trust others. And so learning how to trust in trustworthy environments means that the child will cooperate more. Whereas teenagers are looking more for identity formation and wider social experiences and challenges in the realm of success that they design themselves. They're just beginning to be able to take perspective of other people, and they're really looking to increase their autonomy in a healthy way. There's entirely different developmental needs or nourishments than an infant whose primary need is loving touch and security.
So, like fulfilling being, one of the developmental nourishments is honesty. But we mean honesty within that field of knowing. I recall I was working with one family at one time, and the dad called me up and he said, "I don't understand. I was being honest with my feeling being daughter." And she asked about some of the challenges between me and my wife, and I told her about some of our sexual confusion. This was not a developmental nourishment. It did not bring forth trust in the family or in the relationship. A Waldorf school that I had worked in the classroom and with the teacher, and that night she called me and said, "I don't get it. I asked these children to trust me, but I still don't feel trust here." These things take time to develop. They take relationship and care and understanding. And care is particularly, it's obviously a nourishment for all children always, but care and relationship is so important for the feeling of children.
When a developmental nourishment is consistently available, the innate capacities that are available within that field of knowing can emerge much more easily. When a child is missing a developmental nourishment, it really shifts the question from what's wrong with this child to what developmental nourishment may have been missing or insufficient or unavailable. How can I reorganize to make sure this child gets enough adventure? For example, in a child from 9 through 12, people don't think of adventure as a developmental nourishment, but it really feeds the opening of the heart and the emotional capacities and the emotional wisdom in a child if they have a sense of awe and wonder through adventures. So adventure is a very important developmental nourishment. And when children don't have enough adventure and inspirational activities in their developmental diet, so to speak, then you'll start to see various things in their behaviors that indicate that this is a need. So we can't exactly fault the child for showing us through their behavior that they need a developmental nourishment. It's up to us to understand what developmental nourishments might be required at different ages and different fields of knowing.
I think that's particularly a challenge for parents in some cases, especially during transitions. So, how you nourished a child, say from ages 0 to around 7, 7.5, the child, as soon as they move into the next field of knowing, needs different nourishments. So, the child's changing, your relationship to the child changes, and also what the child needs changes. So then the family has to reorganize around those needs and well-being emerging in a different way. So the things that you might have done for the last 7 years suddenly aren't quote unquote working. Something's shifted and changed, and the child needs a different nourishment.
Some people and some families have difficulty with that reorganization that you just mentioned, Brent. And again, I would just like to keep it rooted in the physical world. Many kids, including our own here in this house, love pasta and ate mostly and only pasta until they were 7 or 8. And then all the changes start coming forward and they develop more sophisticated palates, more sensitivity to herbs, and so on. In the same way that you cannot treat a child in the formative developmental stage, it's insulting. We had a family camp and there was the line waiting for dinner. And this one young girl who I mistook was still in body being, she had come to the line and we were in the back of the line. And I said, "Oh, you can go to the front of the line, your staff," and that sort of thing, to give her a little bit of like support for at 7 years old, for who she was. And she looked at me and she said, "No, I'm staying here. That would be unfair. You don't treat people that way." That is feeling being emerging from body being before my eyes. And of course, I was in transition, so it's hard to recognize. Nevertheless, the child made it very clear that's unfair. Do not put me at the front of the line, whereas a body being kid would have scampered, generally speaking, to the front of the line.
But you mentioned epistemology a bit earlier, and that was another question from a listener. Was we talked about in previous podcasts ontological epistemology, and what in the heck is that, and why does someone need to know such a big term to raise a child, to raise my children? Why do I need to know that?
Well, I understand that entirely. It's a big mouthful. So let's break it down into 2 words. Ontology, it's really the study of existence, or what is real, what exists. That's ontology. And epistemology asks, how do we know what we know? So it's the study of knowledge and how we know what we know. So ontology is about who we are and how we experience our own being. It's the lifelong process of coming to know ourselves more fully, including our inner world, our relationships, our place in the larger world. That's ontology. Epistemology is how we know. It asks how we distinguish assumptions, opinions, beliefs, and theories from knowledge that has been tested, lived, integrated throughout our whole being. So we put the 2 words together, ontological epistemology. They're not really separate processes. So as we develop, we are shaped by how we know, and how we know shapes who we become. So a child's way of knowing cannot really be separated from her developmental moment or her developmental capacities. So, for example, a toddler knows primarily through sensory exploration, through movement, and through relationship. And as I said earlier, loving touch. An 8 to 9 to 12-year-old child increasingly knows through fairness and justice and caring and shared meaning and relationships, whereas a teenager begins to know through the exploration of their ideals and identity formation. So as their way of knowing changes, their sense of self changes as well. So growth in self-awareness changes what we are each capable of understanding. Does that help? Or maybe we need a little bit more clarification.
Well, I think it helps. And the only thing I would add, why we need to know this term, for instance, in natural learning relationships, we talk about body being, we talk about feeling being, we talk about ideal being, and we talk about reasonable being. And we attach the word suffix, we attach the suffix being to each of the fields of knowing. Being means nothing essential is missing. We want to break through this idea of children, little creatures moving on to their adulthood, and we have to move them along and we have to actually make progress happen. But we don't, because everything that child needs for the wholeness of who they are is there in that current field of knowing. And if we're not looking at them as whole people, if we're not looking at being, which is ontology, and we're not looking at how they know in their being, which is epistemology, then we're going to fall into old patterns like stages and ladders and progress and seeing people through cultural conditioning rather than through the essence of who they are.
I'm gonna pause here for a moment because we have something really exciting to share. So many of you have reached out asking how to get involved or how to explore this work more deeply. And we're happy to say that in July, we're launching the Natural Learning Relationships Introductory course. This 7-week experience offers an introduction to the ideas we explore here on the podcast. So child development, relationships, well-being, and the innate capacities that unfold through human development. People often tell us that this work transforms not only the way they see children, but the way they understand themselves and their relationships and the people around them. This introductory course can be taken on its own, or it can serve as the first step in our 12-month certificate program, which includes 10 courses and a practicum. And because this work is deeply relational, we intentionally keep the cohort very small. Enrollment for the July cohort is already open. Folks are enrolling and participation is capped at 8 people. If you'd like to learn more or express interest, visit transformativedynamics.org and fill out the interest form, or check the links in the show note. One more thing. Thank you to everyone who's already sending questions and reflections about the podcast. Every few episodes, we'll be setting aside time to respond to listener questions directly on the show. You can send questions or comments through the contact form on our website or by emailing Ba directly, ba@lovemoreconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to the conversation. So our next question is, in episode 4, you discussed the idea of poisonous pedagogy. Sometimes manipulation isn't obvious. It's not an obvious punishment or control. Sometimes it can sound loving or caring on the surface. How does that kind of covert manipulation affect a child's development during feeling being? And I can start this one off because I am right in the throes of feeling being at the moment. And this question really resonates with me. The part that resonates is the difference between feeling and sentimentality is something that's really alive right now for my son and I as he navigates his own feeling world. And it's an emerging wisdom for me to be in relationship and see the depth of his feeling without all the conditioning and how that's very different than sentimentality. For an example, sentimentality would be how we're conditioned around how we're supposed to feel. So it's in movies, it's in greeting cards, it's in our family stories, it's in cultural expectations. And the world tells us how we should feel about parents and grandparents and teachers and other important people in our lives, our friends. But I can see, and in relationship with Max, he doesn't have that sentimentality very much. So his is just genuine feeling. And what is trustworthy or not trustworthy, or who is what trustworthy and not trustworthy, who he feels loved by versus who he doesn't, those kinds of things. And anyway, that sentimentality can make feelings confusing. So I'm seeing within myself as I reflect how much of that was a part of my growing up and just a part of our culture, and how that feelings aren't confusing. Max's feelings are not confused. It's just an extra layer of conditioning that makes it where I sometimes am confused in my feelings. But that's that sentimentality. That's what Miller's talking about. It's poisonous. And apart from that conditioning, feelings aren't confused. And so I am enjoying seeing that within myself. Of when I'm confused, I'm like, wait, am I really confused, or what's hiding here? What's causing this confusion in my feelings?
You asked for some more subtle ways in which self-trust is undermined through poisonous pedagogy. And the one that I notice a lot that carries all the way through to the adult years is, I think I feel. And many of us, our feelings are not honored as feelings. I'm not thinking I'm feeling. I'm feeling. And feeling is contributing along with the sensations and whatever intellectual or cognitive events are happening for me that comes out verbally. And that's a huge mistake that people make. And it's the emphasis on the verbal linguistic aspects as if they're real. It's the emphasis on having a why, answering why, which has become an intrusive question rather than an opening question. And it demands a justification. And a justification undermines justice, which is a feeling. Because I'm just because the feeling arises in. So to me, that's one of the more odious and insidious ways of the poisonous.
I think we have to remember that parents are developing too, that and parents are developing oftentimes together. And sometimes a child's behavior reveals areas where a parent needs support, healing, or in growth in themselves, where whatever we did or did not receive in our own childhood development comes to light when we're raising children. And it's not a failure. That's just part of being human. And we have to be willing to become more aware, self-reflect, and a little bit more responsive to ourselves in being able to come forward with a developmental response or an appropriate response to our children. Many times we didn't get our needs met, and yet we're being faced with the child in front of us who needs us to rise to the occasion and meet them where they're at. There's a growth opportunity there for us as well. So it really requires us to step into the unknown a little bit and pull out of ourselves something relational to the child and see what emerges in ourselves simultaneously. It's a powerful developmental moment for us too.
Right. So the generational wounding is another unseen aspect of the poisonous technology. It's very important that we step into this, or we're just going to continue to be duped by people selling us false advertisements and false promises that really eat up our resources as a culture and our lives in an everyday way.
It's really important to notice that. I agree with you. And one of the most popular things to understand is that the purpose isn't to identify who's at fault. There is no fault. The purpose is to understand what supports this child's development and what do I have to reach in to myself to pull out to be with this child in a way that's meaningful for their developmental needs.
That's a great point. What Alice Miller says, and what I wholeheartedly agree with, is you have to respect the child's feelings. James Gilligan, who did this incredible work in violence because he himself, in reflection of his own childhood that was rife with violence, he became a psychologist and head of the system in the penal world in Massachusetts. And he did an incredible thing. He called all these people who had committed the most heinous crimes and life imprisonment to come. And there was only one rule. They met as a group. They couldn't put anyone else down. And over time, they were asked to talk about why they did what they did. Why did you gouge out that child's eyes? Now, no one asked them. They had to come forward voluntarily. But everyone listened without a problem. Everyone listened. And he says time and time again, shame is the root of violence. And when we're not honored in our developmental unfolding, we start to feel shame and blame. And when we do that, and it goes all the way through to adults, as you were saying, Josette, then we are actually reinforcing the violent atmospheres in our world.
I think that leads into the next question because you brought up justice. What do children have to do with social justice, according to any system, including natural learning relationships?
Children have everything to do with social justice. What we were just talking about, how they're treated, how we're treated in our development of trust in relationships, plays through all the way to our adult life. But more importantly, children bring social justice to us. The ideal being children, the early teen children, organizing around self-government with strong energy towards their ideals, time and time again, their creativity, bring forth and remind us in so many ways where we're not actualizing the deeper ideals and wisdoms that we have in us. Even gangs are reminding us that as a society, we do not have equal opportunity for all. Feeling being that the younger kids, the feeling being kids, they are bringing forth their sense of justice and fairness, and they're able to distinguish that fairness is situational, but justice is the bigger opportunity to have a just and relational world to live in. And in this respect, they don't have a problem with predator and prey within the natural world. But they have a big problem if their friend is getting treated unfairly by a given teacher. So by allowing them to come forward with their own capacities, they're reminding us again and again and again, who are we? What just world do we want? And how are we going to go ahead and bring it forward?
For example, a child below the age of 8 values primarily sensory pleasant experiences. They play with sensations, they value that which is pleasurable, and their sense of place or their sense of belonging is with people who allow for the sensory exploration of their environment. Whereas a child 9 through 12 values the formation of relationships and the relationship to their own feelings and the feelings of others. And in the context of a given situation, they're looking for who's fair, who's just, and they value that which engenders the building of trust and the building of community and the building of relationships. Whereas a teenager, we're talking now about 13 through 17, values change entirely, and they are all about their ideals and the expressions of those ideals. And they play with identities and identity exploration, like young children play with toys. And they value people who are willing to provide a variety of social environments to explore these ideals, to explore these identity explorations. So teens are going to value have an entirely different set of values than children below the age of 8 or between 9 and 12. And if we understand that, our relationships with them would change entirely. Whereas children between the ages of 18 and 23, I guess we would call them young individuals and not children anymore, they value the discovery of the experiences that would lend themselves to formation of substantive values, that is, values that last through time, such as truth, goodness, joy, values which really bring forth love and justice and care. These are all entirely different set of values that come forward in the 18 through 23-year-old. It doesn't say that the younger values are less or lesser in any way, or the older child's values are more valuable, but each are valuable for their own expression and lend themselves to a socially just world.
For our next question, the listener writes, as a parent, I know I did not do it right and nourish my child appropriately when they were younger. What do I do now?
This is the most commonly asked question that we get over and over, because we love our kids and we actually feel, oh no, I made a mistake. And they worry, and there's a pernicious cultural belief around my child's life was decided in the womb, in the first month of life, in the first 3 months of life, 6 months, 3 years, 7 years. It's not true. What we have to do is go through the open window, meet well-being where it is. And by meeting well-being where it is, provide those nourishments, take your time, understand that there'll be residue from previous developmental malnourishments, and you will see carefully over a developmental field of knowing is 5 to 7 years, depending. And over the time, you will see well-being come forward. Can't kill it. You can bury it, and it may need some excavation. But as long as that child, in our experience, is below 23 or so, the best response is to work through what's available, which is their developmental well-being.
So one of the things I wanted to say, a few things here. First, children do not need perfect parents. It's just not possible. I'm not perfect. Nobody I know is perfect. So just start where you are. If you're just learning about these ideas for the first time ever, just start where you are. That's perfectly fine. And of course, we have to remember our own development matters. Many of us discover that as we learn about human development and innate capacities and what's available at every age, we recognize that we might not have received those things in our own past. So remember the power to repair. One of the most important capacities in any relationship is we can come back, we can do do-overs, we can say, wait a minute, I made a mistake. I'd like to do that again. Children are very, very forgiving. And you could even say, I understand how to do things differently now, and I wish I had understood that before this, but development never stops. We're always, you could look at us as a work in progress, and we're not judging ourselves. Judgment is probably the most difficult thing we do with ourselves. It's not about judging our past. It's about understanding development and supporting growth from where we are now. And children, like I said, don't need us to be perfect. They need us to be willing to learn, to reflect, to repair, and when necessary, to continue growing. The best time to offer A developmental nourishment is always the present moment, and we always have that.
One of the important things to remember is not to blame. Not only not blame yourself, not blame the culture, not blame the environment, not blame education. We know that there won't be the deep and profound nourishments unless a person has really participated in this a lifelong process. But if we blame outside, then we're still involved in the blame game. And there is no blame. Just what Josette was saying. There's no blame at all. There's us learning, growing together, acknowledging what is, and coming back again and again to how do we restore well,
Yeah.
how do we bring it forward in our lives, in our family, in ourselves, self-observing, participating, and remembering again and again that it's not gone. It's not there. Just have to be able to go ahead and engage in such a way as to bring it forward.
I can get us started on this last question. So, the natural learning relationships cohort is where natural learning relationships comes alive. It's a group of people who dedicate themselves to 12 months of exploring natural learning relationships, of taking classes, of doing self-reflection, and doing that together in a small cohort of 6 to 8 participants. It's relational. We learn together in a community virtually through Zoom. It's where we bring natural learning relationships alive in practice. It's more than just reading books. I don't want this to sound like a sales pitch, but it truly is transformative because it's relational. And as Bob mentioned earlier, natural learning relationships isn't a theory, it's an epistemology. We're bringing this to life, our knowing and our understanding, and we do that together. It's living. So it's a switch of perspective. Everything in natural learning relationships requires a switch of perspective. So when we do this together in a cohort, we really allow for that transformation and that shift to take place.
The cohort is everyone finds their own way with natural learning relationships in the cohort. And that, again, points to that it's not a theory, but it's a way of knowing. So one graduate of the cohort is now translating natural learning parts of natural learning relationships into Spanish. And he's going out into Spanish-speaking communities and bringing it to parent collectives there. Another is developing community activities around cooperative games and activities as a way to bring a community together and then hopefully to get more profoundly involved with the families, the dynamics, and the education system to allow it to become a community understanding. There's no limit to the way natural learning relationships has been applied throughout the world. There was a cohort of Tibetan teachers in exile, and they each lived in very different parts of the Himalaya mountains, in different parts of India, and so on. But yet they were together on Zoom with Josette and myself, and they found ways to bring it to their different constituencies as well. So a cohort is a place of discovering the epistemology and beginning to learn how you can apply it in your profession and in your family life and to your own self-knowledge. And in that, we become alive together so that not only are we bringing it out into the world in ways that respond to who we are as individuals, but we are reinforcing and working with one another to make sure that the way they're bringing it forward also has an authenticity to it. And if I had a word for an NLR cohort, it's that it is authenticity. We become the authors of our own lives through self-knowledge and authors of good repute who can bring it to our communities and constituencies. And so, friends, we've come to the end of the podcast. In line with what I was just saying about NLR, one very powerful, inspirational, and important way to bring it to the world is through rites of passage. And 2 graduates of a recent cohort are doing just that. So the next podcast, which will be in 2 weeks, will feature our cohort graduates, Dylan Banker and Allison DeLong, who are bringing rites of passage into their community in Northern Idaho. Thank you today for your great questions, which have been sent on all aspects of the First 5 podcasts. And we are excited next week to bring rites of passage. In the meanwhile, visit our webpage, www.transformativedynamics.org, to learn more about natural learning relationships and the dual certificate program. There you can learn all you need to know about joining our next cohort, which is forming now. This is Bob Lovemore
And Josette Lovemore.
And Brandy McCrae.
wishing you optimal well-being for you and your loved ones, dedicated to all children everywhere and always. See you in 2 weeks.